Tensions continue to rise between India and Pakistan following recent terrorist attacks. Is China's President Xi Jinping secretly trying to negotiate his way out of the trade war with Donald Trump? What is the state of current U.S. negotiations with Iran? And finally, a Ukrainian naval drone shoots down a Russian fighter, demonstrating a new capability in drone warfare. You're listening to Mensch-Kight Geopolitics. Mensch-Kight Geopolitics is your home for conservative commentary on international affairs with an eye toward Israel and the Middle East. I'm your host, Isaac Kight, your lovable lawnsman, your gregarious Vulcan, your mad genius, your shadow president, and your prophet of things to come. Welcome back, insiders and the great listeners of this podcast, the most elite, the most educated, the most well-informed, the most erudite people on the planet. We're back once again, another show, trying to make these more often. My voice has been bad for the last month almost. I got really sick in late April, and it's lingering. It's taken me forever, so I've had a really scratchy voice. And let me tell you, my friends, recording a podcast with a scratchy voice is not a lot of fun. You may have heard over the last few episodes a lot more, and this kind of thing. Anyway, I'm trying. So here we are. I'm going to start today. A friend of mine asked me, what do you think the prospects are for the U.S. economy and that kind of thing? So I just wanted to take a minute, where are we? Because we're hearing stuff about there's going to be a recession. Yeah, right. So I had a friend back in college who was studying economics, and we were talking one time, and I was mentioning, economic indicators and stuff, and just talking about, would there be a recession? And I remember this was 2006, 2007. Things were starting to get bad with the economy, and we were just about to head into some trouble. And, my friend trying to sound like he knew what he talking about, well, wait a minute, tell me what the definition of a recession is. And I'm like, my friend's being cocky now, huh? 2 quarters of negative growth, right? He's like, well, that's right. Well, we're not there yet. And I'm like, okay. So, here you are, you're studying economics, but, you're acting kind of like an idiot. You don't know what I'm talking about. So anyway, it was kind of a funny way to hit back. And look, we're talking about economic indicators. What could indicate a coming recession? Here's a good example. So one of the leading indicators is new housing starts. Another indicator is job growth, jobs reports, right? Things like this. There are different ways, consumer confidence, there are different ways of measuring where the economy is. So we're hearing these people talk about recession. Where are these indicators? My friends, where are they? Actually, they're all pretty normal. And in fact, the jobs report was awesome. We anticipated 133,000 jobs. We got 177 instead. 177,000 jobs, nothing to sneeze at. So the economy is growing. But, when Donald Trump was elected, we had this huge outpouring of optimism for the future. So private industry started investing, the economy started growing, things were going gangbusters into February. And then as they started making all these cuts to public spending, shutting down U.S. aid programs and that kind of thing, there was a bit of a scare tied with your usual fund manager, George Soros, Warren Buffett types trying to cause some economic consternation. And we had a dip in the market back then. And I talked about that as a correction of moving away from a publicly driven government, the contraction of the public sector in favor of the private sector. That requires a bit of a correction. But let's face it, guys like Warren Buffett, they don't care if the economy goes down. They'll buy the dip, right? And we have this joke, going around the memes, buy the dip. With what? That's the point. You and I, my friends, the lawnsmen, the lowly peasant class, those people eking out a living in the country. We, we're lucky to have a retirement fund or a 401k. And so when these things go down, we're sitting there like, oh my God, how am I going to retire? What's going to happen here? And, we can't buy the dip. We don't have mountains of cash sitting around that we can just, pull out and, hey, I'm just going to buy a bunch of stocks. But, these guys can do that. They buy the dip. The economy goes back up. They make money. It's just how they do things. Now, okay, so we had that. So we had basically kind of corrected for the fact that the government is no longer going to be driving economic growth. And that's always a funny thing, because I've had this argument before with people. Government doesn't drive economic growth. That's something Milton Friedman talked about quite a bit, this whole Keynesian nonsense about, well, if government spending is this. And, Keynes was, a man about his era. And he certainly was prophetic when he saw that the Versailles Treaty wasn't going to work. But when it comes to economics, not the guy that you want to be listening to. But here's the fact. I mean, Keynesian economics assumes that that consumers are going to respond to a given policy in a certain way, consumers and business leaders, and they don't. So Friedman made the point. It's like, we've had times when, they've done economic stimulus and they sent a bunch of money out to people and people saved it or paid down debt with it. It didn't drive consumption of goods. The idea is you send out a bunch of money to people and then they're going to buy goods. Well, that's not real money and it causes inflation. Anyway, I'm not going to go into all of that. But the fact is, in order for the government to cause growth, quote, in quotation marks, it must first stifle growth through two primary mechanisms. And then the third, we're all familiar with inflation. I'm not even going to go into that. But the main mechanism, obviously, taxes. Every dollar the government takes in taxes is a dollar that's not in the private sector. So if every private sector dollar we spend creates 10% growth, then the public sector dollar that takes that dollar from you, so now it's taken 10 cents away from the economy, and then they go, even if they spend it efficiently and effectively on really good things for the economy and this kind of thing, where are we going to get 5 or 6% growth? So we're losing the margin. And of course, most of the time, government just wastes money and it does nothing but cause inflation. The second mechanism, of course, is crowding out. When the government borrows, when it's there's deficit spending and there's a lot of debt out there, people will put their money in those safe investments of government debt, of sovereign debt, rather than in the private market, where it's no matter what you do, no matter how safe an investment is, it's riskier than the government. Right. We don't expect the government to go bankrupt anytime soon. But if I buy a whole bunch of bonds from Apple and then Apple goes under, they'll go into conservatorship or receivership, your chapter 11 bankruptcies, and we're up a creek, right? So anyway, that's one of those things. And of course, when government spends money causes inflation. We know this, right? That's the hidden tax, right? They blow a bunch of money, everything costs more, then there's a lower value proposition to production, right? You produce things, but you don't actually make any money out of it because the inflation is eating up your profits. Anyway, so we're seeing shifting away from those types of thinking toward more private market. That's changed things. Now, then Donald Trump did his Liberation Day thing with the tariffs. And yes, that's been a shock. And it's caused it's been a mixed bag of nuts economically. But my friends, so as I've said several times before, this is all stuff that should have been done in the 90s. Like after the fall of the Soviet Union, Bretton Woods was no longer viable. We perpetuated this system for 30 years where America, sells itself out to other countries, and that needed to stop. We did it for China. For what? We created a lot of prosperity over there. They've taken advantage of us for 30 years, and what have we gotten from it? Yeah, we get cheap goods and it helped fight inflation, but we could have done a lot better keeping the jobs here and taking better care of our working class. And that's why all of the wealth has moved to the top echelons of society and the middle class is struggling, right? And that's what we're trying to shift here. So I want you to do this for me, my friends. When you go out and look for economic policy from this administration, go to Scott Bessent. Scott Bessent is the guy who knows what he's talking about. Now Trump will also say things that's important too. But everyone else in the administration, they're people, the trade representative said this and said that. No, Scott Bessent is driving the economic policy of this administration. And he's a very bright guy. First openly gay cabinet member, because, Trump is I guess he gets a reprieve from the Gestapo that's the SS that's going to be going out and gathering up all the gay people to go to the concentration camps, Anyway, My friends, whew, it's it gets it gets stacked up pretty thick there, pretty high there sometimes, and it smells to high heaven. The nonsense these people put out. I don't know that all the bulls in the world could create that much BS, and it'd probably smell better. Anyway, Besant has had several great talks he's given recently. I recommend you go out and listen to them. He gave one just talking about what I just talked about, Besant, talking about Bretton Woods and all this. And this stuff has to change. We just have to rebalance these trade agreements. So yeah, for the moment, we're going to have a little bit of tough time while we renegotiate all these deals, and then things will be on a new axis, right? We'll rebalance, right? As we've renegotiated with Japan and South Korea and Israel and all the other countries that we trade with, and that kind of thing. And I talked about in the last episode what percentages of trade happen with these countries. So, a deal with Japan is going to be huge. A deal with Canada is going to be huge. These kinds of things. So that stuff will work out. Now, there's all that. So we're going to have to iron that stuff out. As a result, there's all this stuff about, Trump's unfavorable, he's got the lowest favorability, and what a bunch of baloney. If you go look at the polls, Rasmussen, RMG, a couple of the decent pollsters, Polymarket, betting odds, have shown that Trump's favorability is actually pretty good. He's been down a few points in Rasmussen in the red here and there, but he's positive again. His policies are popular. The Gallup and all these other polls that have been way off in every election, for the last several decades, they are the ones showing he's down 14 points. And so Democrats are trying to glob onto that and talk about like they're, somehow Trump is unpopular or whatever, a bunch of nonsense. And believe me, in 6 months, this is all going to be very different. All right. When we get to the autumn, we're going to be thinking completely different about the economy. There are just hundreds of billions of dollars of investment coming to the U.S. from Apple, from Boeing, Taiwan Semiconductors, $100 billion. We just got a report, IBM, $150 billion. Nippon Steel, U.S. Steel, just tens and hundreds of billions of dollars being reported everywhere. New car factories, new. There are going to be plenty of jobs. Full employment is right around the corner. We just have to rebalance these trade deals first and let the world know we're not going to let them take advantage of us. Most of that being directed at China, which is where I'm about to go with this. I'm just making the point that I'm hearing a lot of people, and I have friends on the left, I still love them. This is a free country. You have the right to be wrong, my friends. And I try to listen to them and listen to their concerns. And I'm like, but look at all this money that's coming. You can't have that kind of investment and not have a great economy. I'm optimistic, We're headed for good times, my friends, especially for working people. If you're a working man, working woman in this country, you're going to be doing great. By the time we come around to the 2026 midterms, we're going to be living in a very different world, economically speaking, here at home. So that's nothing to worry about too much. I mean, keep an eye on it. It's interesting to watch, how it goes. And I'm fascinated by who wants to negotiate. And the Japanese were the first on the scene. And, Netanyahu was like, oh, yeah, well, we'll drop our trade barriers. We'll no problems. And few others. And then, of course, China is the only country that's chosen to fight us. That has chosen to be a bad idea. So all the stuff I've been talking about last time, and I said, you have to take this stuff with a grain of salt. There are strong indications that China is suffering incredibly from the economic fallout of this trade war. And that led to significant opposition in the People's National Congress in China. It's led to forces gathering against Xi gray organizations in China, new associations that are not affiliated with the Communist Party. Dangerous, dangerous territory. And, the way the Chinese government has worked up to this point has been to stomp on each of these things, infiltrate, stomp out, persecute, and ensure that the Communist Party is in charge of everything. But when this stuff happens all at once, when groups like this start rising and opposition starts rising in certain numbers, and people are hungry and desperate, that's really bad news for a guy like Xi Jinping. His control it's going to slip, okay? This is dangerous stuff. So that's why I say, let's, let's keep on this. Trump is definitely on the right track here. Why should we let China take advantage of us economically so that they can build up a large military force and attack our allies, so that they can side with Vladimir Putin as he tries to invade Europe and commits horrible crimes in Ukraine, so that they can support Iran and North Korea and try to weaken U.S. control and power in the world to destroy and cripple the rules-based international order and bring about an era of what they like to call the multipolar world, but what it really means is where, Russia, China, and countries like that can, rape, murder, and steal and have whatever they want. And there'll be nobody to stop them, One last thought on that. I have a good friend of mine, and we've been having a big debate about this. Jake Jacobs does a lot of great stuff, and Jake, you know who you are. He's been a great commentator, conservative commentator, and I love debating with him because we have very meaningful conversations. And that's the thing. Like, it's great to have friends who are highly intelligent, conservative, and we have our little disagreements and we just go through them and we both know our history. And so we can have a really great talk. And, he's pointing out, so why does the U.S. have to patrol the Red Sea? Why do we have to be policing the world? And I've heard this sentiment from a lot of people on the right for a lot of years. And I'm one of those people, to a certain degree, I opposed the Iraq war and this kind of stuff. Like, why is this our problem? Why do we need to deal with this stuff? Why do we need to be starting wars and this kind of nonsense? It's not really where America should be. During the Cold War, we had a motivation to have to play the game in the world because, if we didn't control the world, the Soviet Union would. During the Second World War, we were up against forces. First of all, we were attacked, but we were up against forces that definitely did not have the world's best interests at heart, and we defeated them. Well, where are we today? So since 1945, now we've had the largest navy, the world's most powerful navy since 1943, and since then, we have been the dominant naval force in the world, the dominant maritime power, and that has been huge for the United States. It has driven our prosperity, it has driven trade, it's raised billions of people out of poverty around the world, a couple billion people. It has helped defeat the Soviet Union. It's brought us a lot of good stuff. But as Peter Zion's always pointing out, the value proposition for that is starting to break down because now we're looking at the world and it's like, so China's taking advantage of us. Why are we protecting trade to China? Also, East Asia is dying demographically. So trade routes to South Korea and Japan aren't that important. They can protect their own trade routes and we'll trade with them still. But, why do we have to be the ones who are paying for protecting this? And of course, around the world, our allies are, like the Japanese, upping their defense budgets, as are the Europeans. So you look at that and you're like, Donald Trump has talked about this new trade route, from like Mumbai, let's say, over to UAE, right, by sea, and then by rail through the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and Israel to Haifa, and by sea through the Mediterranean to Europe and the United States. That's a trade route to India. India will protect the Indian Ocean aspect of that trade and the Arabian Sea because India is a military power. And we need to be building a stronger relationship with India. That would be a great thing. It's good stuff. Anyway, they'll protect that aspect of it. Our allies, Israel is a growing naval power. So is Turkey. We'll see if they continue to be a good force. Italy, France, right? So we have ways to protect the Mediterranean. And the North Atlantic is generally it is in our best interest to maintain safe travel there. But anyway, talking about those kinds of things, these trade routes, protecting the seas, it brings us to a moment here where I can talk about what are our vital interests as a nation and what do we have to protect, right? Classifying those in order of priority. And the first and most important priority for the United States that has been since, 1776, well, let's say since we won the war, the War of Independence against the British, and the American Revolution was successful, let's just say, has been the New World, right? Which includes the Arctic, right, all the way down to Tierra del Fuego and that spit of ocean, the spit of land out there, and the strait out there in the Ross Sea and all that to Antarctica. The point is, the Western Hemisphere, the New World, and the Arctic region north of it are incredibly important to the United States. We cannot allow our enemies into the New World, right? If foreign powers could get control of countries in South America or, God help us, in Mexico, they are in a position to threaten the United States in ways that we haven't seen since 1812. right? Now, during the American Civil War, we had this era where the French took over Mexico for a brief time. And after the American Civil War, we told them to GTFO, so to speak. But, controlling the Western Hemisphere is absolutely paramount. That is essential to our national security. That's one of the reasons I've been on about Greenland so much. It's incredibly valuable to our national defense. Now, secondary to that, is trade to Europe. So I'd say the second tier is, Europe, Australia, New Zealand, for the time being, Southeast Asia too, trade through the South Pacific, which is why the South China Sea is so important, and Taiwan, because that facilitates our trade down there. But Southeast Asia has got maybe 20 more years before they start having the same kinds of demographic problems that China's having. So they're going to start to decline. And so that region will decline in importance. The trade route with India is very important. India is much better demographic shape. They've got maybe 30, 40 years, and who knows, they might actually be able to turn things around and fix their demographic challenges and stay on top of things, I hope. They and Pakistan are the next topic. So that's important there, secondarily, Mediterranean, that kind of thing. And then, in sort of tertiary forms, West Africa, and we don't really need trade routes to East Africa quite so much, and that kind of stuff. So slowly but surely, we're we can back off of this whole protecting all of the seas thing. The benefits of maintaining international trade are positive, but they're costly, and we don't have to anymore. Still, we should have a lot of smaller warships, as I've talked about before, procurement policy, so that we have the ability to cover the oceans, because maritime defense is an important part of our military, our naval mission. We have to be able to protect trade, and that kind of thing. Anyway, all right. So I just wanted to go over that. So Jake brought up the question, why are we protecting the Red Sea? Why can't our allies do that? Why can't other people do that? Well, my argument there has nothing to do with the geography of it. It's who is attacking the Red Sea, right? It's the Houthis. And who are the Houthis? They're Iran's puppets. And so this is back to the question of, it's one thing to give up territory or give up control as an empire. It's another thing to give it up to your enemies, right? So when Rome left Dacia, which is a region in modern day, in the Balkans, around Serbia, and southern Hungary, there wasn't much fallout from that. It was difficult to protect from these people coming from the east. The Danube River was a more natural geographic border. It's all good, okay? But giving up Syria to Persia, now we're talking about the Byzantine era here, not so much the classical Roman era, so late antiquity. Giving up Syria to the Persians during the great geopolitical war between the two of them during the reign of Heraclius and Khusrau, that was a huge problem because you just gave up the Middle East to your main geopolitical competitor, right? Okay, so we're talking much smaller scale here, okay, but giving up the Red Sea to Iran would be bad. And that is why it is in our interest to spend the money to protect it. Okay, now, we should also be developing the kinds of weapons, and we slowly are, the Roadrunner and a few other new anti-drone weapons that will allow us to defend against these weapons and these cheap drones and whatever without spending so much money, because an SM-2 costs a lot of money. That's an expensive missile, right? We got all these missiles and everything we drop off of our fighters and everything, those are expensive missiles. We need much cheaper means of intercepting these drones, and we're getting there. Those weapon systems are being developed, far less expensive, and much more economical for the destruction of these targets, these drone targets. And we can thank the Ukrainians for that, because we've learned from that war that, how we need to redefine our defensive weapons, and, we've learned we need to do. Okay, so as I've said, so this leads me to my point. If we were able to get a defeat of Russia in Ukraine, if we could destroy the Iranian government, if we can, let's say, neuter China, if we could tame them, with this trade deal and all this stuff, and get China to behave itself a little bit better, then we could create a situation where, and North Korea is just a nuisance, basically. Without Russia or China to back them, they don't really have the ability to do much. They have nuclear weapons, and they are dangerous, but they really, without Russia and China, if they tried anything, they'd get clobbered. You see what I'm saying? Okay. So with Golden Dome, with the defense system, which I'm going to talk about in a future episode, I'm really excited about the possibilities for that. And I'm, there's lots of stuff to geek about that. We'll get there. Give me time. But I also don't want you guys to have 3-hour episodes, so I have to keep it short. But with Golden Dome in place and China neutered, Russia defeated, Iran, regime change in Iran, and North Korea contained, we're the world's a much safer place. And yeah, we don't have to be policing everything that's going on. Are there pirates here, pirates there? We don't need to control the world. We can develop safe trade routes to India and to other places we want to go without having to worry about that kind of stuff. And it'll cost us a lot less in blood and treasure to defend those things. So I just wanted to talk about that vision. Some last thoughts on China real quick and the trade situation before I dive into India, Pakistan. One of the things, it's this transit issue, foreign transit, and I don't want to get too technical about this, but this irks me. On paper, China is responsible for about a quarter of our trade deficit, right? So if you look at it, most of the trade deficit, with 3/4 of it's with the rest of the world, a lot of it with East Asia and Southeast Asia, but 25% of it about is with China. But what China does, and especially lately, they will send goods to warehouses in South Korea, for example, and nothing will change with those goods. They don't even print something on the box, not even changing the labels or whatever, and then they will ship from South Korea to the US, right? We have this challenge with K-pop fandom. My daughter's a big K-pop fan. I can't say I don't I like how Korean sounds, like a lot of people, and I grew up listening to Japanese music myself, so I enjoy it. But with a lot of the fandom, the stuff is made, posters, toys, paraphernalia, various things in the K-pop world, hoodies and whatever, are made in China and then sent to Korea, and then they come on here. Some of that's illegal. If you take a product from one country, move it to another country, and do not modify it, but then sell it to a third country, you're not supposed to do that. And this is very deliberate. China is deliberately, moving goods to Vietnam, South Korea, and other places, and then selling it on to the U.S. So there's an argument out there that China is actually responsible for more like half of our trade deficit. No specific numbers out there, but look, that's the point. China's the biggest problem in the trade deficit. If we could tame that one particular tiger, if we could prevent that and make China behave themselves and stop taking advantage of us and reduce that half of the trade, then our trade deficit would decline significantly. So China choosing the trade war is a really good thing for us. Now we have a chance to cow them, neuter them a little bit, and stop letting them take advantage of us so that they can build up a military to threaten us. We should not be paying for people to, during the late British Empire, the 19th century and what have you. Yes, Brits bought a lot of cheap goods from the U.S. and the U.S. gained in wealth relative to Europe, especially during the First World War. But who were they enriching at their expense, right? The United States, a country that shared their values at least. And that's been a very good investment for Europe, all things considered, because World War II, Cold War, we have protected Europe quite a bit. Even today with Ukraine, I'm arguing we should continue to protect Europe within certain boundaries at certain cost levels. But the point is, we don't want to hand off our wealth and surrender our wealth to people who don't share our values, to our enemies, right? Okay. Well, there's that. So we'll see how these trade deals work out. We'll see if we can get China cowed. There's talk that there have been direct conversations between Trump and Xi, and that some negotiations have taken place. Xi and his government flatly deny all of this, and trying to, no, we're not negotiating, trying to save face. But it seems like there is something going on, because China is much worse shape than we thought. There's been this thing in the international news where everyone's talking about how weak Trump's position is now that he's done his day of liberation and all these tariffs and this kind of nonsense. And I laugh so hard when I hear this nonsense. If you're listening from overseas, comment and let me know, how crazy the news is in your area, because no matter, Trump isn't in a weak position. Yes, the economy is down temporarily, but it'll be coming back up. We're talking about the largest consumer economy in the world. If you want access to this market, you have to negotiate with us. And we negotiate from a place of strength. Why? Because we are the largest consumer economy in the world. There is no weakness here. It just irks me how dumb that stuff sounds. Like, and Donald Trump is in a weak position now because of it's like, come on, people. All right. India and Pakistan. it's been escalating. Militaries have moved out. There's the Pakistanis have moved artillery into position. There's been fighting along the line of control in Kashmir. This is another one of these things where these temporary borders, right? When India broke up and leaving the British Empire, it broke up. Pakistan, then Bangladesh was part of Pakistan, and Ceylon became Sri Lanka, right? So British India basically broke up into three countries and then eventually four, because in the 70s Bangladesh and Pakistan didn't get on. I understand that my friend Grant, the casual historian, will be doing some episodes on the history of the Indo-Pakistani conflict. He's been doing some episodes on Iran and its history. Great stuff. That'll give you more in-depth history there if you're looking for it, because let me tell you, he is so thorough. He goes and looks for all the details and gets you all the information. You'll be an expert in a topic after watching his videos. Second only to Grant himself, who's read all the books. It's good stuff. So Casual Historian has some good info for you there. In any case, these ceasefire borders, right? They had a war, India and Pakistan. Kashmir was disputed. Pakistan said it's part of their territory. India said Kashmir is ours. It's this largely mountainous region up in the north of the Punjab, and it's up kind of in that corner. China's on one side, little spit of Afghanistan up there, and then you have Pakistan. Pakistan got a small piece of Kashmir, most of the Afghan border and the mountainous region there, and India got the rest. They got the lion's share. And in the years since 1947, in the years since that conflict, there's never been a negotiated peace. Well, my friends, from Korea to Israel's situation, these temporary borders are ridiculous. Eventually somebody needs to negotiate, right? If India and Pakistan had come to some kind of agreement just to keep the border where it is, other than just maintaining the status quo, that'd have been great. India was willing to make peace many times, but Pakistan has not been willing to. They want more of Kashmir, and then the Pakistani intelligence services finance, these terrorists who go around murdering Hindus in India, and that, of course, leads to war. My sympathies are with India. After October 7th, this is another kind of October 7th, but India's had this constant drone of terrorism from groups backed by the Pakistani government, and they're tired of it. It's time for this to end. And if Pakistan is not going to stop financing these terrorist groups, then maybe India just needs to go to war. This is an act of war. How many times, supporting terrorism in another person's country, that is an act of war. How many times does India have to suck this up? It's ridiculous. So my hope is, as this escalates, the Pakistanis will, wake up to reality. Even with nuclear weapons, they are still far weaker than India. India has some decent air defenses, granted, mostly Russian weapons systems, but they have some Western technology. Pakistan has F-16s and some more modern fighters, but India's air force is just so much larger. And while Pakistan, it's one thing to have an F-16, but it's not like it has the technology that we have. You see, we take out a lot of the high-tech stuff when we sell to third-party countries. So, the Pakistani Air Force would have an advantage 1-to-1, but in a 4v1 situation where you've got a bunch of Indian planes against a handful of Pakistani fighters, they're going to go down. I think India trounces in this case. Hopefully, like I said, the Pakistanis will wake up. They'll have an appropriate and reasonable degree of fear, and they will back down. And maybe they could enter some really serious negotiations and say, okay, well, we'll stop financing terrorism in India if, we can reach some kind of agreement. That would be ideal. Hopefully they'll get the memo here. But as we've seen with a lot of these Islamic fundamentalists, they don't get the memo. Hamas and all that. So good luck, India. Prayers for you and for the families of those who have lost, especially the young woman who lost her the newlywed couple. She'd lost her husband of just a few days or a week, something like this. We know this pain, my friends. We know this pain, and Americans have felt this pain too. The World Trade Center bombings in the 90s, the 9/11, the Tsarnaev brothers and the Boston. I mean, again, the constant drone of terrorism. We know this pain. Israel knows this pain, and all the luck to India. Good luck, and go get them. Like I said, hopefully the Pakistanis will be sane and back down. I wouldn't count on it, though. Don't hold your breath. Now, let's talk a little bit about what's going on in the Middle East. Israel continues to assert control over the Gaza Strip, breaking it up into different little sectors. They've continued to whack Hamas leaders and go after Hamas infrastructure. The war has definitely toned down from the previous heady conflict. Hamas is having a hard time staying in power. We're getting more and more videos of them beating people in the streets and shooting Palestinians. They're having a hard time maintaining control, right? So we'll see what happens there. But Israel is definitely in much better control of the situation. Finally, there are a few rockets they fire every now and then, but for most part, we've got control of the rocket situation. And the Israelis, like I said, after October 7th, if nothing else, Israelis deserve to live in peace. And for the time being, in the north, there is peace vis-a-vis Hezbollah. For the moment, things have calmed down there. And of course, Jolani and the Sunni Islamist people who run Syria, they don't want weapons going from Iran to Lebanon either, because they regard Hezbollah as an enemy, enemy of my enemy. Jolani recently, let's talk about Syria for a minute here. Jolani recently indicated that he'd be willing to join the Abraham Accords. And it's one of these things where it's like, that's a nice sentiment in English. Meanwhile, his goons are going around killing the Druze in the suburbs of Damascus and southern Syria. The Israeli military, IDF, has to go in there to protect this Druze minority. We have these memes going around. I don't always kill minorities in my country, but when I do, the Israeli Defense Forces intervene and stop me. It's horrifying what's going on in Syria. But thankfully, the IDF is protecting the Druze for the most part. They're trying. And, the Druze, the leader of the Druze, their spiritual leader, recently met with Bibi Netanyahu. And so there's been some talk there. It's looking like, I would say that if Syria is going to disintegrate, at this point, the Kurds could have their own piece of Syria and so on and so forth. Israel doesn't need to control that area. They're probably going to have to protect it. But the Druze have a national army. There could be a Druze state in southern Syria, and along the Golan. And it'd be a great border state for Israel. Israel could help them, train them, arm them. And it wouldn't take much organization or sophistication to have a military force that could fight off the current Syrian army. That Israel destroyed all the heavy weapons, so the planes, the helicopters, the missiles that the Assad regime had, and the factories for that. And thank God, because look at the way they're behaving now. Could you imagine this genocide if they had the missiles and planes and all of the heavy weaponry from the Assad regime? Oh my God. All right. And, the Alawites over, they're getting massacred over along the coast. And while I don't have a lot of tears for the Alawites, considering since Hafez al-Assad, Assad's father, took power there between the two wars, the 67 war and the 73 Yom Kippur war, since he took power there, they've been really horrible to the Sunni minority and the Sunni majority, and they've been okay to the Druze and the Kurds, but the Kurds and they massacred Kurds at different times. So, they're kind of getting back what they earned. At the same time, nobody should be suffering like that. So it's unfortunately, as Syria has turned into this failed state, Israel has been increasingly having to step in to protect minorities and prevent horrors and this kind of thing. So, Jolani wants to talk about joining the Abraham Accords. That's a nice sentiment. But one thing you could do is, not massacre the minorities in your country. That might be a start. If you want to be a respected leader in the civilized world, maybe you act in a civilized manner. Just a thought. Picking my brain here, just throwing out some, stick it against the wall and see if it stays. Oh my God, people. Wow. All right. Well, there's that. And of course, the Houthis have continued their thing. And so we come to Iran. Steve Witkoff has been the primary negotiator dealing with the Russians and the Iranians, and there started to be some questions to his competence of late, and maybe the Trump administration didn't pick the right guy to send over there. So, we're hearing... I don't know if I want to go into all the little niggling details, but the impressions we're getting from the negotiations with Iran are that once again, he's been talking about maybe letting them keep their civilian nuclear program and this kind of stuff as part of some kind of deal. That's basically the JCPOA. That's this nonsense thing that Obama negotiated. Like, you can keep, if you like your nuclear reactors, you can keep your nuclear reactors. Just don't make a bomb. Or make a bomb in 25 years instead of in 10. It's like... Come on, people. Have we learned nothing? Really? Have we just... if I were Rush Limbaugh, this is the part where I'd be rustling my papers. I'm shaking my iPhone, my smartphone. That's the... You can't hear it, but I'm shaking it. That's my equivalent of the rustling the papers, right? This is ridiculous. So Steve Witkoff's days with the administration are probably numbered. We need to take a tough line. Bibi Netanyahu has made statements about maybe taking out their reactors. There is a way to do that safely that doesn't cause radioactive effects long run. Again, our war is not with the Iranian people; it's with their regime, and it's only with the Iranian people to the extent that they support their regime, and a lot of them don't. A large number don't. Unfortunately, enough do. And as we saw, it's not difficult to convince a majority just to follow the status quo. People are like sheep. Sheeple. Anyway, they will follow the leader, and sometimes I don't know. It's like you lose faith with people. I don't know how you could support a regime like that, or have been a German, and not oppose the Nazi regime. I can understand that you might want to maintain your cover, but there's the path of people like Bonhoeffer who, stood up to the regime and got killed for it, right? At the same time, there's something to be said for keeping a low profile and maybe gathering information and trying to get that information out to allies, what have you. Some people did that. So there were different ways to resist. Perhaps the funniest story in Germany was this baron in what's now Poland, who was a big communist sympathizer. Somehow didn't manage to keep himself from being arrested, but he was passing information and whatever he could get to the Russians. It wasn't very useful to Stalin because Stalin had better spies around. He always did. As soon as the Russian troops got there, and took control of the area, this guy is like, "Hey, look, I'm with you guys," or whatever. Yeah, the Red Army took him out and shot him. Funny story there. Obviously, opposition to the Nazi regime is a good thing. It was a good thing, but that guy, he tried, I guess, but Stalin definitely wasn't grateful. Let's put it that way. Okay. Enough tangents and rambling on my part. Let's go to Eamon's Minute. I have another Eamon's Minute for you, and then the break. And I will come back and talk about drone warfare a little bit and a few other things going on in the world.
Hello everybody, this is Eamon's Minute, where I tell you a cool fact from history. Hannibal was a very interesting character. He wanted vengeance against Rome after Rome beat Carthage in the First Punic War. He ended up attacking Rome, but he didn't want to attack through Sicily because they'd expect that. So they decided to cross up north through Spain and the Pyrenees Mountains, through southern France, into the Alps, crossing the Alps in a treacherous journey that had thousands of deaths, and ended up in northern Italy. They started out in Spain with about 100,000 men. We don't know exactly how many men, but 100,000 is a good guess. By the time they reached Italy, they ended up having approximately 22,000 men. And that's Eamon's Minute. Back to you, Dad.
You're listening to Mensch-Kight Geopolitics with Isaac Kite. Or as the internet trolls say, mouthpiece of the Zionist conspiracy, spokesman for the elders of Zion, highly paid propagandist of the Mossad. Yeah, no. Now you're messing with the son of a mensch. In the past 24 hours, as I'm coming to record this, we have seen a wonderful event. 2 Russian fighters have been shot down by Ukraine. But it's the way in which one of them was shot down. One was over the Crimea. The other was shot down by a naval drone. And this has been something, I'm still geeking out about it. It's been something that I've been talking about for a long time, that drones are going to change warfare. And I've mentioned a couple of times how I think the U.S. needs a lot more smaller warships, and basically I think something with the capability of like an Israeli SAR 6 class corvette, but designed to be a frigate. The Constellation class frigate was headed in the right direction, and then they redesigned the whole thing, made it more expensive. There's delay and delay and delay. This is supposed to be a ship that's ready to build. That was the whole point of the Constellation class frigate, was that we were going to use this frigate that the French and the Italians use and just upgrade it a little bit. But when you redesign 75% of the ship, it's no longer the same ship, and it's not as easy to build, and you get delays, and Gewalt. Anyway, but something like the SAR 6 class frigate that's designed for seaworthiness would be good. You have 48 missiles. It's got its point defense systems. The Israelis use a version of Iron Dome for that. But basically, that's your close-in defense, right? It'll have to have some cheaper anti-drone weapons, of course, and your usual anti-ship missiles, torpedoes, that sort of thing. Facilities for a helicopter, but maybe not necessarily having a helicopter aboard in any case. So you have this concept. This is my idea. A relatively small but safe seagoing vessel. You might have to stop to refuel more frequently, but at least we could keep more of those kinds of ships out there. And we should have like 60 to 100 of these small ships. But one of the cool things about ships that size is that they could carry more of these naval drones. For a while now, Ukraine has been running these small naval drones that are remotely operated. Originally, they were building them onto like ski mobiles, right? And they have this explosive capability. And it's like you take a simple thing like a ski jet, and you build onto it. You put an explosive in it. You build onto it the ability to a computer that can run it and guide it, and you send it out there, and it can go blow things up. They've gotten so much more sophisticated since then, and having something like that you could just, at a press of a button, dump it over the side and send it off into battle, either on an automated mission, a pre-programmed mission, or, under the control of a sailor aboard ship. And off it goes and boom, it hits another ship and it blows up and it damages that ship and, disables it, at least to some degree. Okay, well, the Ukrainians keep adding to these things. One of the problems they've had with these drones is that since they're on the surface and they're visible, Russian aircraft, including helicopters, have been able to see them and intercept them and destroy them, right? So this is the great thing. They put an anti-air missile on a bloody sea drone. It's just... And so this Russian Sukhoi 30, it's just like a backbone, major, an important part of the Russian air fleet, let's just say, major asset for launching missiles, cruise missiles and such into Ukrainian territory. And this drone spotted one of these and shot it down. And so this is just beautiful. Now these automated sea drones can engage in air combat, surface to air combat. We've been talking a lot lately about the idea of like the F-47 fighter having a couple of drones flying alongside, having these unmanned assistant, vehicles going with them, maybe submarines operating in an area with a couple of unmanned submarines operating with them. Surface ships certainly can do the same. And these I think the point here is that we need to open our minds. Originally my thought was just have the ski jet type thing there. You have like 4 of them aboard a ship. Like I said, you press a button and you dump it off into the sea, and then it goes off on its mission. My thought was just, so here's a really cheap weapon system that you could use for small craft for sure. Like if they're coming at you with fishing boats or Coast Guard vessels that are really small, you hit them with one of those. It probably won't destroy the vessel, but it'll damage it enough that it can't function, and maybe it'll slowly sink, and obviously that's, but the point is you've disabled it, but it's a really cheap weapon system. So if it goes up against an enemy like a Chinese destroyer and it hits it and does even a small amount of damage, it's a really cheap way to put a hole in a ship. But now you think like with a little bit more sophistication, kind of like my concept with the Crazy Horse drone, this, if the U.S. built our own version of the Shahed drone, just a few feet long, a few feet wide, small little thing with an explosive on it that, cheap engine that could fly slowly and deliberately toward its target. And you could build like 20,000 of these things and put them on trucks or whatever for like $1.5 billion, right? And you have like a battery of 20,000 one-way drones sitting in Taiwan ready to fire, and it's like if the Chinese start attacking us in a matter of like 45 seconds or whatever, we can have all 20,000 these drones headed toward China. I mean, so this would be huge. Anyway, but now we can take cheap drones like that, not unlike these ski jet drones, something just a little bit more sophisticated than that, with an anti-air missile aboard that can, under certain circumstances, shoot down an enemy aircraft. I mean, my friends, science fiction is science reality. We are now in a new world. There are so many capabilities here. There's so many things that can be done with that. We can now start building much cheaper munitions that can do a lot of damage to our enemies. And if we build them, we'll have those capabilities to go after them. And they're far less expensive than the countermeasures. Building, 6th generation super stealth fighter that has a laser on board and it can do all these things and do all the things. And that sounds great, but they're so expensive, we're never going to be able to build a lot of them. We need to balance that with building cheap weapon systems like our enemies build. And that way you'd have, better deterrent. As I talked about with the Crazy Horse drones, imagine having like 7 batteries in the world. Like you hit Poland, Romania, Russia's pretty much screwed at that point. They can't, if they start a war with NATO, like they're going to have 20,000 targets hit in Russia in a matter of minutes, right? And same thing in the UAE, put one in the UAE. Now Iran's in deep trouble. You put one in northern Vietnam, 2 in Taiwan, and 1 in South Korea. And now China's deterred, North Korea's deterred. Like they know that if they start stuff, they're going to have all these little drones blowing up every communications facility, every command and control facility, every radar, every truck, every missile battery. I mean, and you can damage these things. They're very sophisticated. You can damage them with relatively little explosive power and very inexpensively, right? Anyway, it just requires a change in thinking. We're slowly getting there when it comes to anti-drone weapons. And I'm going to talk more about that in the future. But like I said, I mean, we're getting there on that. But this is just pretty cool. Like cheap, unmanned drones operating at sea can shoot down fighters. We also just got a report that maybe the Kerch Bridge has been hit again. The Kerch Bridge is the bridge that connects Russia, the Russian mainland, Russia proper, to Crimea, which is Ukraine. And something that was one of Putin's big pet projects to show that, Crimea is part of Russia and this kind of thing. It goes across the Kerch Strait, which is the strait betwixt the two, into the Azov Sea. And it's been hit a couple of times, it's been damaged, but apparently it's been hit again. And there's been, we've seen it burning. If that's the case, then the important part is they can't move supplies directly into Crimea that way. They have to use the overland route, which means they have to go through the Donbass, through, southern Donetsk, Luhansk, and Luhansk is north of Donetsk, but down through Zaporizhia and Kherson into Crimea, and the Ukrainians might eventually be able to cut that. First of all, they can fire missiles and send drones to attack that route more easily than the Kerch Bridge, but they can also, if they could break that land bridge, if they could take Kherson, for example, the rest of Kherson Oblast, they could cut that off. Anyway, the point is, Good for Ukraine there. We've also heard that the Trump administration has authorized $310 million for air defenses in Ukraine. And we're slowly seeing a change of tone there with the administration. So I'll leave off on this topic. Donald Trump has been played by Putin. Putin is really good at this. There's a great interview between H.R. McMaster, and he's interviewing Boris Johnson. I mean, Boris Johnson is one of the greats. And Boris Johnson is one of those people who's been vocal about this, axis of evil, the new Axis powers for a long time. So when I was just starting to think about Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, all of them as a unit trying to weaken American power, and I just started articulating that, Boris Johnson's out there writing about it. Oh, there's a new axis of evil in the world. And I'm like, this is brilliant. I mean, he's a very smart man. He says a lot of stuff I agree with. He mentions like sustainable growth. I don't like the word sustainable. I like being environmentally friendly, but the word sustainable ends up being unsustainable in a lot of cases. Anyway, or maybe economically inviable is a better term there. I don't know. Anyway, my friends, the important thing is. Johnson talks about in that, and H.R. McMaster, about how Putin manipulates people, how he used this Russian hoax thing as a way to say, suggest that somehow he and Donald Trump had been through this, they'd suffered together through this horrible thing. And it's like, they didn't suffer through anything together at all. But Putin does this. Like he and his propagandists are out there. They've got everybody convinced, that Zelensky was put in by the deep state, right? He'll find that, we don't like our deep state here. We do have real problems with people in our own government who have underhandedly undermined democracy by refusing to enact the will of the people and undermining the actions of voters. So, there's the kernel of truth, but that has nothing to do with Ukraine. The deep state tried to stop the Ukrainian insurgency, the Maidan revolution. They didn't want to rock the boat. They never do. Most of your deep state stuff prefers the status quo. And people like Zelensky, outsiders, he was a former actor. He was elected to fight corruption and this kind of thing. They don't like leaders like that. The deep state doesn't like outsiders. So they would have preferred the Poroshenko government, for example. But in any case, the Russians do this all the time. They'll try to act like we're against some common enemy, like we're serving a common purpose. We're all on the same side, and they'll play this game. Well, Putin did this apparently with Trump, and H.R. McMaster was noting that in his time as national security advisor in the first Trump administration, he saw Putin trying to do this a lot, and it seems Trump fell for it. Now, I'm critical of people, and I praise people when their actions are praiseworthy, and I'm critical of people when their actions are not. Let's just say. And I've been very critical of Trump on this. He has been played. He's been manipulated by this man. He was forcing Ukraine to make all these concessions, like somehow Ukraine was the problem when Russia's the aggressor, and now Putin refuses to stop the war. The proof is in the pudding, my friends. It's there. It's perfectly obvious. It's in front of your face. So I recommend that interview, Boris Johnson and H.R. McMaster. Great interview. Good talk by those guys. But also, Trump's position here is not looking good. And she and Khamenei and the Iranians. I mean, he looks like a fool to all these people. Right? These are, dictators and these are not good people, right? And they don't look kindly on us. And so when they see our leaders being manipulated by others, they're sitting there like, hey, maybe we can play this game too, right? It makes us look weak. It definitely makes us look bad. So I really hope Trump will get on top of this issue. This is a sign after their meeting in the Vatican, excuse me. After the meeting at the Vatican between Zelensky and Trump seems to be changing his tune here a little bit. Hopefully he gets it. The big problem we've had is that the woke right has been so anti-Ukraine and so pro-Russian. They've been so misled, into cowardice and treason by Russian propagandists and people like Tucker Carlson, and other idiots like that, anti-Semites, who have these, men of poor character, let's just say. And Tim Pool and his crowd, they were being paid by the Russians for a while to put this stuff out. So so they'll do this, Anyway, and somehow Trump fell for it, too, a little bit. I hope he gets it. I hope he sees how Putin used him and abused him and manipulated him, and that seems to be headed in the right direction. When there's talk of a 3-day ceasefire around the Victory Day, VE Day celebrations, which in the West are on May 8th, but that's when Admiral Dönitz officially surrendered. But they had to repeat the ceremony on the 9th so that a Soviet general could be there, because the Soviets wanted to be represented at the surrender ceremony. Whatever. In any event, so they celebrated on May 9th. And, that's a big deal. And, they celebrate victory over the Nazis. They don't want to talk about the $11 billion in 1945 that the U.S. sent to the Soviet Union, the million vehicles, the, tons and tons of food, aluminium, and supplies that we sent, and the trucks and so on and so forth. They don't want to talk about that part. They just want to talk about how Russia defeated the Germans after, being their allies for the first couple of years. Anyway, but they wanted this 3-day ceasefire. And Zelensky's out there like, hey, I've already agreed to a 30-day ceasefire. We could have a ceasefire for a month and we could negotiate a final, end, a final agreement. And Trump has held that line as well, that what's on the table is a 30-day ceasefire and a final peace agreement. That would be nice. But Putin's bet the whole country on this Ukraine thing. And the only way he can stop the war is if it would put him in a more strategically advantageous position, which means, he'd have to be able to undermine Zelensky. It would have to be a deal that Zelensky couldn't sign. That's what people are talking about. The deals that they've put forward are deals that Zelensky couldn't sign. My friends, there's this thing called democracy. If Donald Trump started raising taxes and sending our jobs overseas and doing all the usual stuff, we wouldn't support him. Right? You see what I'm saying? I mean, that's not how democracy works. So Zelensky has like 75% approval rating in Ukraine right now for standing up on the minerals deal and for standing up to Trump on all this stuff. If he signed the ceasefire agreement that the Russians were asking for, he couldn't have stayed in office. And it would probably be, Zaluzhny or, the mayor of Kyiv who would be taking over for him. Who'd win the next election. Somebody even less pro-Russia, somebody even more anti-Russia would have taken over. So, that's how democracy works. In any case, so that was a terrible deal that was put forward, and the Russians still haven't agreed to it. They still haven't stopped the war. And so somebody asked Trump, well, what concession are the Russians supposed to make here? And he's like, well, they're not going to take over the whole country. So his approach to this negotiation was that the one concession Russia would make is that they won't win the war, and then Ukraine has to make all the other concessions because they don't have any cards. And that's back to the cards thing. That shows that Donald Trump had no idea what's going on in Ukraine. I just don't understand how he could be so completely naive about the situation on the ground. Russia is not winning this war. Russia is not going to win this war. The only way Russia could win this war is if all of the allies stop supporting Ukraine, which is what Putin's working toward. When the U.S. stopped intel sharing with Ukraine, that was beautiful for Putin. He could bomb their cities and kill more children, right? Trump negotiated this deal and tried to negotiate this deal, put the deal on the table. The Russians still won't sign it, and then they send a bunch of drones into cities and bomb Ukrainian children again. A 3-year-old, a 12-year-old, children are dying. This is the deliberate targeting of civilians, right? Russia's not going to win this war, right? And that's why he's not seeking negotiation. It's just, my services are available to the administration if they want them. I can help bring some, a cold, hard dose of reality if they need it. I know I'm just a landsman and nobody listens to me. I'm not an academic and I'm not don't work at the State Department. I'm not some big macher, some big guy that whatever. But for some reason, I've been right about all this stuff. I said this is what would happen if Trump tried to negotiate a deal long before Trump was received the Republican nomination, let alone before he became president. Over a year ago, I said this, and it has proven to be true. Any attempt to negotiate a peace will not work because Putin will not agree to it. So Donald's out there, Putin, Vladimir, stop. And it just, it's the same thing we had with Joe Biden. Just don't do it. Just don't do it. Got to vent my frustration. Trump's doing a lot of great stuff here at home and on other areas. Apparently Witkoff's negotiations aren't going very well with Iran, but I appreciate all of that. I voted for the guy, but this level of naivete and this is not good. This is not good. He doesn't seem to understand what's going on in the world, and that's bad. So hopefully he will get with the program now and see that the Russians are the bad guys. They really are. They're not winning this war, and with our help, Ukraine can defeat them. And when they are defeated, when the Russians are driven out of Ukraine and they retreat in defeat and their country is falling apart, they will never threaten us again. And then we can take out the Iranian regime and they will never threaten us again. And then China is isolated. And with the trade negotiations, the trade war that Trump's pulling now, and there's been some concessions from the Chinese there a little bit, maybe, we'll see, talk about it in the next episode. But the point is, we cow China and the world will be a safer place for the long term, okay? So, having vented my frustrations about that, that's that, and I'll go ahead and close out the episode here. Let me know if you like the new format. Find me on X, Mensch-Kight Geopolitics. It's still Inside Israel News on Facebook. I don't do a lot on Facebook anymore, but you can still find me there and message me. If you're interested, you can make comments on Spotify or Apple, and I'd like to hear from you. Tell me what you think. What do you want to hear? More of this, less of that? I'm not here to tell you what you want to hear. I'm here to tell you what I think you need to hear. Whatever you get from me, it's the honest truth as best I understand it, because I want to make sure that I'm telling you good information. But I'm not just going to tell you, the sugar-coated version of things either. Anyway, with that, as always, goodbye, lehitrot. Since I recorded the episode, a couple of things have happened. I just have to add this brief addendum here before I publish. First of all, the Houthis launched yet another ballistic missile. This one landed near Ben Gurion Airport in Israel, and this is once again, I talked about the Houthis, they're threatening our allies and our national interests. Again, in the Middle East there. So several people were injured. No one has died so far in Israel. But of course, the Houthis continue to be a major problem there. The other piece of information is that the Ukrainian V-7 naval drone that shot down the Sukhoi 30 fighter near Ukraine, apparently it shot down both of the fighters. So a naval drone has now taken out 2 fighters. And this is interesting because the naval drone, the V-7, cost something like $250,000 to build, and it just shot down 2 $50 million fighters. So a $250,000 drone just took out $100 million worth of fighters. Now, Russian planes are relatively cheap. Okay, so just imagine someone disabling or shooting down, an F-35 with a little drone. That would be very costly and more than a little problematic. So I think we've demonstrated the value of drone warfare. So with those quick updates, I'll be signing off for real this time. Goodbye, lehitrot.
Writers of the history, stand with me. Look into my eyes and see. People go away but never say goodbye. Someone stole the moon tonight, took my light. Everything is black and white. Who's the fool who told you boys don't cry? Hours and hours and flowers. Life is no game for the cowards. Why? The time goes by. Every day I'm losing my mind, holding on in this mysterious ride, dancing in the storm. We got nothing to hide. Take me home and leave the world behind. Baby, promise me that never again. fantasy, ecstasy, everything is meant to be. We shall pass, but love will never die. Hours and hours and flowers, life is no game for the cowards. Why the time goes away. Every day I'm losing my mind, holding on in this mysterious ride, dancing in the storm. We got nothing to hide. Take me home and leave the world behind. Baby, promise me that never again. I'm still wet from this October rain. October rain. October rain. Baby, promise me that never again. I'm still wet from this October rain. October rain. אין שום, אין מקום, אין אותי מיום ליום. כולם ילדים טובים אחד אחד. Bring them back home now.